Hey guys, welcome back to LTF1. Today we're here with Alex does F1 stuff, and he's got some graphs for us to look at and give our opinions on. Alex, how are you?
Hello. I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's literally the first time I've been on like a collab with people. It's decent. It's very cool.
Sorry, the first time we've had so many issues as well with my mic and all that stuff.
Technical issues will always happen. They're always going to have them. Always going to have them. They'll get better though.
Hopefully. Ishan, how are you? It's been a while.
Yeah, I'm good. It's been a while. We've not recorded in a week or two.
Yeah. Raj isn't with us today, but probably won't feel that loss. Alex, do you want to talk us through the best graph?
So this first graph is basically just looking at the whole season and particular teammates. We're looking at Mercedes at the minute and just their qualifying performances so far. So we've got nice qualifying positions graph. We've got their gaps in each session as well. We've got the head-to-head in the big bottom right, and then the average position throughout each qualifying as well across the whole year, which is actually P2 for both drivers. They were very, very close to each other. So that's so far all we've got on the screen at the minute.
How come is it Styria and Turkey that are excluded?
So Styria and Turkey were excluded because they were just rain-affected qualifyings. So I didn't want to include them in the average ahead as, for example, Styria, what was Hamilton? He was 1.2 seconds or something faster than Bottas.
Yeah.
Which is considerably faster than a lot of the dry times. And there's a lot of different variables that come in with rainy races and rainy qualifying. So I just sort of excluded it. It just made a bit more sense. And I've done that for every teammate across the board.
Ishan, do you love shitting on Bottas?
I'm not that bad.
This seems to back up a lot of what we tend to be saying, though, that Bottas is just not there, right?
In Bottas's defence, the first thing I'm going to do is defend Bottas. Is Mercedes' main priority is Hamilton. So Hamilton's, as everyone knows, their first driver. So it seems the right thing that Bottas is second on most of the graphs. Well, he is second because he's the second driver. So I'm not gonna go all out on attacking Bottas today because I don't dislike him. I just think there's better alternatives.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Definitely better alternatives out there. Yeah.
And the head-to-head, does that count the race that Hamilton missed in Bottas's favour?
That does not. So the head-to-head just goes up to 16 because Hamilton didn't take part in Sakhir, so he's not actually included in that one, as that would have been a bit unfair to award a point to Bottas in that favour against Hamilton. So, and then I've also left out the mini race where Bottas was against Russell, as again it would only be, you'd only see one set of results for just one race, so it wouldn't really make much sense to do that.
Ishan's probably quite happy that you left that one out because Russell would have been behind in this finally. But yeah, this set of data kind of confirms it, but as Ishan said, he is a second driver and I guess he's there to be second.
Just the backup, isn't he? Yeah.
I don't agree with that. I think he should be pushing him. Look at the black lines from Hamilton. He's well ahead. Even when Bottas is ahead, he doesn't seem to be as far down the road as Hamilton gets.
There's only certain times, certain races of the year is when Bottas is actually quicker. They don't happen consistently like Hamilton. He's consistently quick throughout the whole year, whereas Bottas only really gets him in qualifying, especially just once or twice, maybe 3 times a year. And that's about it, which is what you need to have in order to overcome someone like Hamilton. You need that consistency.
But then again, it could be argued in Bottas's favour that whilst Hamilton's job is going out and winning every week, Bottas is more of a defending Mercedes 1 and 2, being the more defensive driver to keep Max Verstappen and co behind. But yeah, I do agree though that I'd rather see someone push Hamilton rather than defend Mercedes from the rest of the pack.
Yeah, that would be good. Like Rosberg, exactly like Rosberg when he was in the team, where they were just pushing each other to the max. That is what we need again, 100%.
Those were the...
And yeah, go
on. You can...
Yeah, no, I'll go. Yeah, yeah, and I think I may have argued this point on a previous podcast. If you've not watched them, go and watch all of them. shameless plug. But I think I've mentioned before that George Russell would be, who I'd take at Mercedes over Bottas, because I think he would bring that back to how it was with Rosberg, and there'd be both drivers pushing each other because both want to win. Whereas I think, again, as we had said before, Bottas is kind of happy with his role at Mercedes, and he's not going to try and push any boundaries or push the boat out too much.
That's true, because he's been there for 4 years, going into his 5th year now. Whereas in what was it, Rosberg's 3rd year, he actually won the championship and overtook Hamilton and beat him on track. And we haven't really seen that much from Bottas. Whereas Russell could just provide that extra benefit and extra battle that we need.
Yeah, I think so.
But if you believe the rumors, then we're never going to see Hamilton and Russell in the same team.
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't believe him, but if that is true,
I would really like to see it happen, but I don't know if Hamilton will stay on in 2022. That's the big speculation. Is he even going to be here next year? Who knows? Where's the contract? Where is the contract? It's non-existent.
He'll be here next year. He has to be here next year. I don't think we can.
100%. Agreed. He's got everything to gain. Staying on this year, his 100% realistic chance of getting that 8th championship, and then in 2022, if he comes back, you don't know who's going to be winning. Mercedes may not even be at the front in 2022.
Yeah, I'm sure they've got a contract. Mercedes is probably just playing this up to get those extra likes and retweets on every.
That's true. Yeah, they've probably got some master plan in the works on Twitter and on the social medias. Yeah,
they'll probably announce the day before Australia or something.
No, they will. Yeah, before the first race or before the Bahrain test or something like that. They'll just announce it straight away.
If we go to the next one, best qualifier ranks.
So this is the order that my data produced. So I used 7 different categories to give ranks to the drivers, basically ranking each of those individual graphs that we saw on the previous panel, and then averaged out all of those 7 ranks. And then we end up with this order that is on the screen at the moment. So Verstappen, according to the data, was declared the best qualifier out of 2020. Then it was Russell. Then Magnussen in the Haas is actually P3, ahead of Hamilton, ahead of Grosjean, Giovinazzi, so forth, down to Vettel, Albon, and Stroll. So that is what my data has said against 7 categories. I think 3 were based purely on teammate battles, and 4 were based off of your own individual performance, regardless of what your teammate did. So it's kind of like a 50-50 split between individual and teammate performances.
That kind of shows, because obviously the top 2 on here, Verstappen and Russell, had their teammates 100% covered. And then even at the other end of the scale, Stroll and Albon was nowhere this year, unfortunately, and Stroll's never been known as a qualifier. So it kind of tracks. But Magnussen getting
in the Haas, yeah. That definitely surprised me in the data, but that's what it pulled up. It's looking at things like the gaps. So we had the gaps chart in the previous panel. It takes that into account. It takes into account your standard deviation, your range, all sorts of different things to come up with this ranking. And it managed to pop in P3, which that's definitely the surprise for me. And
McLaren being sort of far down the standings, I guess, that for me, that's a surprise. I thought I'd see one of those 2.
Outside of the top 10, for me, it was their inconsistency. They were very uppy-downy throughout this season. They were never like Red Bull and Mercedes, always getting into Q3, or conversely, Alfa Romeo and Haas always out in Q3 or Q1 even. They were sort of up and down, like Racing Point as well, which is why we don't see Sergio Perez in the top 10.
Nishan, thoughts? Your boy second.
I knew it would be. But no, when you look at a graph like that, your first thing you sort of expect is, the sort of drivers that you think of when you think of F1, the Hamiltons, the Perez this year and so on. But I might be recency bias because Perez finished the season very strong. But yeah, Magnussen's probably the biggest shock for me, as it probably has been for you too. So yeah, but Albon, I think next year with Perez in that seat, I think if we come back to this in a year's time for next season, then I think Perez and Albon's seat, will be much higher up than where we see Albon last season.
I hope so. I think everyone hopes so as well, because it would be a bit gutting to see Perez, after being done so well this year, and then struggling in a decent car, in a car that we know can challenge Mercedes. And then if he still struggles, I don't know what that says about Red Bull.
Yeah.
In a way, I kind of want Perez to struggle a little bit, because if Perez goes in there and brings it straight to Verstappen, what does that say about Albon? Like, do you know what I mean? If Perez goes in there and struggles, then Albon can point at that and say, look, I'm not a bad driver. It's just a really bad.
Yeah, but then what does that say about Gasly as well? If that happens, it's surely the same thing, because Gasly struggled in his first half of the season against Verstappen. But look at the season that he's had in AlphaTauri. He's got a victory, for God's sake. He's up there. He's having the time of his life.
If we go to the next one.
Yeah. Well, last word on it. On the topic of Red Bull, I do think this season will be a driver versus car thing for Red Bull to sort of put to bed whether it's been the second drivers that have just been not good enough at Red Bull, or if it's just a second driver car. So yeah, that'll definitely be really interesting.
Yeah.
Next one. It goes to the next one. There we go.
So this next one is very, very similar to the qualifying panel that we saw first, but this is now just applying it to the race data instead. So again, I'm including all of the races. I'm not excluding any races like I did in qualifying. I've then included the little points graph as well. I've got the times that they were DNF'd or finished on different racing laps. Again, the average positions. And this is where Hamilton really pulled ahead of Bottas. You can see that Bottas in the last couple of races really didn't have a good end to the season, at all, and ended up with an average of P4 across the whole year, and that's again said in the head-to-head at 12.4. So it's definitely towards Hamilton this year in Mercedes.
Which race did Hamilton secure the title at? I can't remember.
Turkey, when he managed to get that victory by something like 30 seconds or something like that.
So does it support that after Hamilton's won the title, Bottas lets go?
Sort of flop, possibly. I can't remember what round number Turkey was, whether that was round 13 or 14. It was around there. I think it was actually round 14, because it was before Bahrain, which was round 15. So yes. And that was, so it would be, because that was where Bottas did a million pirouettes and spun around a lot and ended up all the way at the back. So yes, I would say that sort of constituted his downfall really at the end of the season. Just not having a good end.
And I do remember Bottas did have a bit of bad luck towards the end of the season as well. I'm trying to remember specifics, but I do remember Bottas having bad luck towards the end of the season as well, which didn't help him. But I do agree that maybe he did let go slightly after it was confirmed Hamilton's won again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually something we see from Hamilton. I can remember when he used to tie up a championship and then bin it the next race.
And yeah, that actually did happen. I think it was 2017, wasn't it? He crashed in the Brazil qualifying or something like that, and literally the first session after he was crowned champion, he binned it into the wall, and he was done.
And on Bottas, you go.
Oh, if you actually remember back to, I think it was 2015, where Hamilton won the championship in Austin, I think it was. Rosberg then went on to win the next 3 or 4 races in a row, and then carry that momentum on into 2016 and win the first 4 races in a row to win, I think it was 7 or 8 in total, which is something that we haven't seen Bottas do. And that probably helped Rosberg especially manage to actually overcome Hamilton. Even though it was Hamilton's crowning moment being the champion, it was Rosberg who was taking all the glory and all of the race wins at that time.
It seems like Bottas can never capitalize on a run of good luck. That is true. Momentum going ever.
No.
And the bad luck's always there for him. Even I can remember the puncture in Azerbaijan last season, was it?
That was 2018. That was brutal. That was. But he's also had like a couple bad starts this year as well, not even just at the end of the season, like throughout. He's just usually lost out to Verstappen in a couple races as well.
Ishan, you don't want to get in on the bashing Bottas again.
As I said at the start, I'm not that bad. But yeah, it does support the argument that I initially made that he's, the second driver and he's more for defending against the rest of the pack. But yeah, Hamilton is just the better driver, and I don't think there's too much more that can be said about that, to be honest.
Right.
Although he has had bad luck, and I did say that before, but I don't know, there's having bad luck and then there's just being blatantly not as good as your teammate, and I think he covers both of those bases. Because there's other drivers that have had bad luck and not been as blatantly bad as their teammates.
Well, we can apply that to Verstappen, can't we? Because he had, 5 DNFs this year? And yet he finished P3 in the championship, and Albon was, I can't remember what position he was, P5 or 6 or something like that.
Yeah, I think he might have been 6th, 7th maybe, I can't quite remember.
A long way off where he should have been, in short.
Yeah.
If we stop bashing Bottas and we move on to the next one, best racer ranks.
The best racer ranks. So this again looks at 8 categories this time. Again, a 50-50 split between categories that look at your teammate battles and categories that look at your own individual performances throughout the year, across the whole entire season. And again, it puts Verstappen as the best racer of 2020. Then Hamilton P2, the same rank as Sergio Perez. Then Kimi Räikkönen actually pops himself P4. Then again, the 2 Haas cars well within the top 10. Then Ricciardo, then Gasly, all the way down to Bottas and Albon, who had the worst race ranks by some margin, actually, by over 2 points in this graph. But that's what the data said.
I would have thought for this one that Albon would do better, because a lot of his standout races were the ones where he qualified really badly and then made it back.
Pushed forwards. Yeah, that is true.
But
no, you go ahead.
But Perez and Raikkonen doesn't surprise me that much, because he had quite a few good races where he was able to make up positions.
Mm-hmm. I remember Italy was one of those where he capitalised after the red flag, and he was actually running in a podium-paying position at one point. But just sadly, the Alfa Romeo just didn't have enough pace, and he just slipped back and back and back, and then outside of the points. And then there was also that rainy race. Was it Turkey or another one where he just waltzed past everyone again in the Alfa Romeo up to like P4 or P5 on the first lap? It was great to see.
I think that was Turkey.
Was it Turkey? Okay, yeah. It was so good to watch. It was really good to watch.
He had a good few lightning opening laps in the season. And again, the McLarens
are a little bit far down, outside the top 10.
Even though they had quite a few races of missing out on Q3 or even Q2, but still making it back into the points.
Again, I'm not 100% sure what's gone on with this data set and why it's put them so low, because I definitely would have put them, at least one of them, probably Sainz over Norris, inside the top 10, but I don't know why it's decided to chuck them out. Maybe just other people like Gasly, Ricciardo, the 2 Haas cars have just done that little bit better in the other categories that we don't necessarily look at, that's decided to put them above McLaren overall.
Yeah, because I think if we were making this data set, if we were just asked to rank the best racers,
you definitely wouldn't put Haas. You wouldn't put Haas in the top 10.
They would
not
be
at all.
Nowhere near the top 10. George Russell's fallen from grace a bit. He's gone from second in the qualifying to a little bit.
I think just borderline into the top 10. And that was mainly because Latifi was significantly closer to Russell in the races. It was only a dominant stranglehold in qualifying that Russell actually had over Latifi. But in the races, Latifi sometimes actually outraced Russell and was a better racer in some of them. I can't picture the ones off the top of my head at the minute, but there was some where he was genuinely quicker throughout the race, and Russell never really took advantage of his qualifying positions to push forward to score some points. sadly. He did have some missed opportunities, yes, but Latifi was almost as equal a racer as a Russell there.
I can remember quite early on in the season, one of the first few races that Russell managed to drag the car into Q2. It may have even been Austria. And then he had a horrendous start. I think he got tangled up with Magnussen and ended up across the gravel and back down to P20. And that's the first time I kind of thought, is the qualifying so good that it's masking maybe a bit of a lack?
The race pace, yeah.
Yeah, I think possible. So because George Russell manages to outperform the car in qualifying on a fair few occasions, but as soon as he gets into a race with 19 other cars, he's sort of dragged back down to earth again by the performance of the Williams. So I think it's not surprising to see George Russell just inside the top 10, but not far off Latifi either.
We got cut off on the last one, but was there anything else you wanted to say about Russell's poor racecraft, Ishan?
Poor racecraft. I think everything with Williams over the last few years, you've got to apply what I call the Williams tax, which is a tax applied to how good a racer can be inside a Williams car. And I think you can apply that especially to George Russell. Maybe just because I like him, but you know.
Do you think they're going to have a comeback season next year? With the closer ties with Mercedes, the new money, bringing in Jenson Button into some sort of advisory role?
I don't think next year. I think they'll have much the same year, possibly capitalise on some of that bad luck that they had, especially Russell winning it behind the safety car. They may score some points, but it'll be much the same. It'll be 2022 that I think we'll actually see a different Williams, like completely different, like resurgent, maybe back to say 2016 sort of Williams, not 2014, but hopefully something better.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of it's PR, but with Jenson Button, I think that's quite exciting. And again, this is I'm not sure is PR or not, but when George Russell returned and they were talking about development for next year within the media, they were saying about George Russell, he had picked up on things from the Mercedes car that he had taken back to Williams and not directly copied, but been influenced by. So I'm hoping next year we have a white Mercedes on the grid as an addition to the pink Mercedes we had last year.
Hopefully. It'll be good to see Williams actually fighting up there again, getting some points.
Yeah. But as you said, I don't think it'll be this year. I think it'll be a bit of a process. It'll maybe take 2 or 3, 4 years, but yeah, I think it might be better. Hopefully they'll get 1 or 2 points this year.
Hopefully by 22 they can get at least fighting in the midfield every so often. At least. Yeah. Maybe it's like the AlphaTauri is on a race track that suits them, they're there. Otherwise they're just there or thereabouts.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I'll get behind that.
So,
this next one. Okay, so this is a little bit more complex than the other ones, at least in my views. So this just looks at your practice FP1, 2 and 3 times, as well as your Q1, 2 and 3 times. On the left is every single driver, and then on the right is just the teams. And then I've just taken the fastest team's time to make the graph on the right, so it's a little bit more easy to look at, because there's only 10 lines rather than 20. And overall we can just see how well everyone's progressed. So we can see that Mercedes had a small little dip in Q1 pace as they actually lost out to Red Bull when they weren't the fastest car. And then we see other teams like Racing Point losing considerable time from Q2 to Q3. And then equally, if we look all the way on the left graph, you can see Nicholas Latifi is just nowhere. This is all data for Austria round number 1. And Latifi isn't anywhere close to even the whole pack, let alone his teammate.
This is, I told you none of us were good at maths. This is a nightmare. But it looks like Mercedes were doing their standard hold it back, and then turn the engine up.
They have definitely made, always throughout this season, up until Belgium or Italy, whenever they introduced that technical regulation for the party modes thing, they've always been making around 0.8 to 1 second gains between their Q1 time and their Q2 time. And then after that technical directive came in, that sort of sliced to about half a second, less than half a second, and they were more in line and a lot closer to the rest of the field as well after that technical regulation.
You can almost see that Mercedes-powered Racing Point has a similar thing, but it seems to start earlier. As soon as they hit FP3, they've turned the engine up to some extent, but then they've just not been able to carry that through to P3.
Yeah, they sort of follow the same trend as Renault and McLaren, and especially Ferrari as well. So it's definitely pulled them forwards. If I was to have produced a similar one to show their 2019 pace as well, we'd see them come forward a lot, but they're still just not quite able to capitalize and get in front of the rest of that midfield, at least for Austria. If I was to look at Hungary, I think, for example, they would actually be much further ahead, as they had a lot of pace in Hungary.
Ishan, any comments on the
bunch of lines?
On the many lines in front of you?
I'm looking at the lines and I can feel my short-sightedness coming through very slightly as I'm focusing on what they say.
All it really shows is just their progression. That's it. We start nice and slow in FP1 and we end nice and quick in Q3, and you just see it go nice shallow decrease in time. Some of them don't always look like this. Some of them are more of an L sort of shape. They have a very horizontal section in qualifying. I think it was the 70th anniversary Grand Prix where it was literally just horizontal. They were making nice significant gains throughout practice, and then qualifying, and they made maybe a 10th gain from Q1 to Q3 overall, and that was it. So you get different variants of this, but this is the standard sort of layout of what this looks like.
I think one of the graphs you produced was the lap to lap data of the 70th anniversary Grand Prix.
Yeah, that's actually coming up in a little later on.
Ishan, if you think this is bad for lines, that one. Let's try and... There you go.
Oh, wow. It's like an abstract art piece.
Right, I will admit this one is messy. It's just a mess. It's very difficult to see what's actually going on this one. But this is just the ranks per race, quite simply. So if we look at Austria, we see that Lando Norris was actually declared the best driver for the practice to qualifying progression. So I'm not looking at anything to do with the race in this section. And then this particular category looks at 221 individual mini categories to come up with it. And I think that's however many 221 divided by 17 races is, roughly 18 sort of. And you can see how each driver progresses. We see actually Nicholas Latifi from practice through to qualifying in Sakhir was the best driver in this one. And then each of these lines gets averaged out to produce the next graph in the list. This is definitely a messy one. Messy.
Twice, Vettel's been declared as the best driver, Turkey and Hungary.
Yes. Again, this is just for practice to qualifying. You've got to sort of exclude what happened in the race, which a lot of people focus on. And they're like, oh, but he had such a bad race. But that's not necessarily what the data's looking at. It's mainly looking at the practice and qualifying.
Should we move on to that next graph then?
I can indeed, yeah. As it's a lot neater to look at than this
one.
There
we go.
So this is the driver progression ranks, exactly like I said, averaging out each of those lines in the previous graph. And once again, we have Max Verstappen leading this one. From Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris pops up to P3, finally McLaren in the top 10, and also Sainz is there as well, P7, P8 sort of pace. Russell, much the same as where he was. And then we have a big drop-off from Perez to Stroll, and then another big drop-off from Ocon down to Raikkonen, and then we have Latifi all the way at the back.
This seems to be pretty well split in terms of who we see as first drivers and who we see as second drivers in teams.
That is, yes, this is true.
there's nothing surprising about the gap or the step between Perez and Stroll, in my opinion. That's quite expected. And then you've got Ocon, who's returning. Raikkonen maybe proving that he's past his sell-by date. Ocon having a year out and then stepping back and still beating him on the progression ranks, you think. Is it influenced by the fact that Raikkonen has a lot of experience so that maybe he can get on the pace earlier and therefore doesn't progress too much through the weekend?
I'm not too sure. That's physically down to Raikkonen. This just looks at the data that is put out by each driver. So you could say that might come into it, possibly that he knows all the tracks and things like that. But then every driver knows all of them. It doesn't really matter about your experience so much nowadays.
Ishan, can you read the numbers on this one?
I can read the numbers on this one.
Yeah, the numbers aren't particularly relevant on this. It's just sort of the order from left to right, really, we need to be looking at. So Verstappen, number 1, all the way down to Latifi on the far right as the worst ranking in this category.
Yeah, I think, as Akshar, the point he made, it's pretty well split between first drivers and second drivers. The only one team I'm slightly surprised there's such a massive gap for is Ferrari, because Leclerc's 4th, 7.24, and then Vettel with 13.47 is 16th. So, yeah, even though Vettel had an awful season, I didn't think that his progression would be that bad, maybe. Again,
progression was perhaps the wrong word to title this category, because it just looks at the performance against your teammate in practice 1, 2, 3, Q1, 2, and 3. That's what this one heavily focuses on, more of your teammate battles as well in each of the sessions. So it is to be expected Vettel to be that far down, because he was absolutely outclassed by Leclerc in the last sort of 3 quarters of the season. The first couple of races, they were dead heats. They were almost even. And then it just sort of slipped away for Vettel. He never really came back from that. And that's the big gulf that we see in this graph on screen at the moment.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because I guess when I think of the season, I didn't quite remember how far down Vettel was for most of it, because I guess he's just not used to it. So, yeah, that's why for me it was a bit of a shock.
And it looks like Kvyat had a worse season. Like, I thought Kvyat was doing okay. Like, I felt a bit sorry for him, the fact that he was getting dropped from AlphaTauri. But he's got a similar kind of gap going on to Gasly here. That gets
again, that's very similar to the Leclerc and Vettel. Is he was just sort of outclassed by Gasly in most of the sessions. The gaps were usually large. It wasn't Kvyat out-qualifying Gasly a lot of the time. It was only, I can't remember exactly what the head-to-head was, but it definitely wasn't even like the McLaren was. And it definitely wasn't like the whitewash. So he did manage to outperform him sometimes, just not enough to make this nice and even, unfortunately.
Russell making another top 10 appearance. Yushin will be happy with that.
So expected.
He loves this position. He's been there.
He does love that position. Yeah. He's
been there for a while. Hopefully, he'll move up when he gets the Mercedes seat next year. Let's have a look at the next one. And it's the next one.
Yeah, so this one is the Laptime Chart. So this basically just maps on, for every single driver, their lap time from lap number 1 all the way to lap number 52. Now, I decided to choose the 70th anniversary Grand Prix because it shows a hell of a lot of pit stops, and they are the large peaks that we end up seeing on this graph. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 individual groups of pit stops. And then the 2 far peaks on the right-hand side are basically fastest lap pit stops, and they will usually appear in most races all the way at the far right. And it's for people that pit late and end up trying to bag the fastest lap on low fuel and brand new tyres.
Do you think they've done what they intended to do with the fastest lap point? because it was supposed to get everyone to go for it at the end. Maybe a bit of a risk, someone makes a mistake. But now we've just, like you just said, you'll always see those last minute pit stops.
It's normally just one or two drivers that end up going for it, and you end up actually losing more if you're in a battle, say, especially in the close midfield. You're not going to see a midfield team go for the fastest lap, are you? Because they're going to lose more points by pitting and then hoping that they can get past all of the cars on their brand new tyres to then also score the fastest lap bonus point. It's a lot to ask for one of the smaller teams or the midfield teams, whereas a team like Mercedes or Red Bull that usually end up with a large gulf between them and the midfield can happily go for it because they end up popping out into the free space. So I do feel it hasn't quite worked how they wanted to, but it's going to be difficult to retract it and take it back.
That being said, we did see quite a few midfield teams picking up the fastest lap point. I think the McLarens got it a couple of times.
The McLarens definitely did, yes. I think they got it 2 times in a row at the start of the season, I believe, in Austria and Styria.
And that would have been, even though it's just a point, the symbolism of the fact that they got the fastest lap would have been, I think, quite a big boost for those back at the factory.
Yes, definitely. It's a nice morale boost for a lot of them. It was like when Magnussen got it last year, or it would have been last year in the Haas, the only non-Mercedes, Red Bull or Ferrari to get the fastest lap last year. And like that would just be a nice morale boost for the team and just positives as well.
And I think also it'd show how far McLaren have come, especially since, was it 2018 where they were last or second last? It'll just show how far they've come in a short space of time as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I really hope they continue that next year. I hope that the compromise isn't too large between engine and chassis performance.
Everyone I feel is hyping up the McLaren Mercedes comeback, but it could actually come back to bite them because you don't know how much of a compromise they're having to make, because they're using both their tokens, their only 2 tokens, on getting this new engine, which doesn't leave them a lot of wiggle room to actually accommodate, for example, the rear suspension, the front of the car as well. They haven't got a lot to play with, moving around everything to accommodate this new engine. So it may not work as well as they'd like. It may be like when they changed from Honda to Renault, and they were better, but they weren't where they wanted to be in terms of pace. I feel it's definitely more of a 2022 gamble that they've gone for going into Mercedes engines.
And they definitely took the decision when the Renault looked like it was a long way off. And this season, It's not been there, but it's not been too far off. They've probably had their best season, I'd say.
I would say that, yes, absolutely. Renault have seemed much more... Is competent the right word? I'm not 100% sure. They've definitely seemed much more competitive this year in terms of package. Reliability as well. That's 100% gone up for them.
Because that was a massive issue for McLaren, especially with all of Alonso's radios highlighting that. It was, I'm sure they made that decision at a time where Renault just looked like a dog, and they'll probably have to make a decent compromise next year. But 2022, maybe we get a chrome livery and that
would be nice. That would be nice.
I'm banking on it. Vision, you've just looked scared this whole time since the graphs come up. Your eyes widen and you just look.
Again, it's me trying to focus on the lines and the numbers.
If we move on into the next one, it zooms in like onto that large section. So we sort of skip through the pit stops and we actually see the big pace differential between everybody, which actually it highlights how much faster some of the teams go, especially in the opening laps. So up to about lap 10, we can see that huge pace differential between the 2 Mercedes in the blue and the orange, and then Max Verstappen in the grey. And then that sort of ish comes back between Verstappen and Hamilton from about laps 15 to roughly 29. And then it actually pops up once again at the end of the race from laps 36 onwards, with again Lewis Hamilton, Alex Albon popping up there, Max Verstappen, and who is orange? Valtteri Bottas.
Is this the race, the team radio from Max? I'm not going to say it like a grandma.
That is exactly the one. That is the one, yes.
Because this looks like a close battle between him and the Mercedes. He's there.
Mm-hmm. He's always there, consistently there. The Mercedes are never able to pull away. If I was to have chosen Spain was an exceptional one to show the massive pace differential. At times they were 1 second, 1.5 seconds quicker than the rest of the field for well over 2/3 of the race. It wasn't until the very end that they actually sort of slowed down slightly. It feels they absolutely floor it for the first half and then build up that huge gap that we always see them have and just coast all the way to the end.
It seems like even though we've had one of the most exciting seasons in a long time, that sort of masked the dominance. It didn't go anywhere. They've still had it. We've just been nicely distracted by an amazing midfield.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And midfield is actually winning. We've had 2 midfield teams winning. We've had different people on the podium. How many? I think we've had 12 or 13 podium sitters, the most since 2012. So it's definitely been an upturn season. But like you say, dominance-wise, it's much the same.
Ish, we zoomed in for you.
Does this help? Does this help at all?
Yeah. But yeah, as you're saying about the midfield this season, I do think that'll carry on into next season as well, and hopefully it will, because I can see next year the race for third, and again, I believe we've spoken about this in the past, but the race for third this year will be really, really intense because it's between about 3 or 4 teams this year. And whilst I do think the Mercedes dominance will carry on, it'll be Mercedes, Red Bull, the midfield with Ferrari, Renault, kind of, and Aston Martin now will be. Wait, did anyone just hear that noise just then?
No, just go again.
Okay, yeah, I'll start again. Sorry. My phone just started buzzing for no reason. Apologies. Right. Yeah, with what you're saying about the dominance being masked this year, I do think the dominance for Mercedes and Red Bull will carry on into next year. But the fight for third will be even more intense next year, with McLaren, Renault, Aston Martin and Ferrari all going for third. I think next year, as I said, whilst the dominance will continue, it will be masked again by a really good midfield battle. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
But hopefully, as the rules are staying much the same this year, Red Bull will actually hit the ground running. They will actually be competitive. Hopefully, that is the big hope, that because there isn't so much of a big change and there is all this freezing of the regulations, and we saw throughout the season Red Bull progressing, catching up to, and in Abu Dhabi beating Mercedes fair and square, it may actually bode well for a possible title fight. But then we equally know that Mercedes stopped developing this year's car, at least 2020, back in Spain, I believe it was, and they brought very, very, very little compared to Red Bull in terms of updates throughout the rest of the season.
If Red Bull can manage one of these seasons just to get the first half of the season even 50% as competitive as they finish the season usually, we could have a title race on our hands. But the fact that they're usually just not there, and it takes them half a season just to figure out the car
just to
sometimes.
turn up, yeah.
I remember they were having front end problems with this car all the way until the last half of the season, with both drivers struggling with it. Yeah, Verstappen did a lot better with what he had, but he was still struggling with it, and they still didn't get on top of it for a very long time. And there's something to be said about the fact that I think Red Bull said that Newey was getting sort of bored with this era of F1 regulations, and that's why he went to work on the Valkyrie project. But they've got him back as really hands-on designing for next year and the year after, so hopefully they can find some of that magic again.
Hopefully bring an actual title fight. That's exactly what we want to see, because that's what we were missing last year. Along with all the excitement that we had in the midfield, we just missed that title battle. Whereas if we had the same midfield and then a title battle, we're looking at one of the best seasons, a potential best season ever in Formula One.
100% agree. This is
the race progression ranks. So now we are looking at entirely race data. So I think I've done something like 1,975 individual categories to come up with this order here. So there were nearly 2,000 averages that I had to make to come up with these values on the screen at the minute. And about 2/3 of those look primarily at your individual performance, isolated completely from your teammate, and then 1/3 of those look purely at your teammate's performances as well. And then once again, for the fourth time in a row, we have Max Verstappen P1, Lewis Hamilton P2, and George Russell P3. Then it's Stroll, Ricciardo, all the way down to Vettel and Raikkonen towards the back end of the field.
This is really, once again, backing up the fact that Verstappen may have been driver of the season this year. Hamilton did a great job. He wraps it up. Greatest of all time, possibly. But Verstappen had a very good season.
Absolutely.
A lot of the graphs, he's been first or second. And yeah, this just goes to prove that again. Russell, we said that his race pace wasn't, or his racecraft wasn't quite there, but this puts him P3. I guess, does that mean that he was
indeed
improving as the race goes on?
So sort of. It also looks at your consistency, your average position each lap. So I had to go through, work out what position everyone was on every single lap. And then for the 17 races, work out your average position on lap 1, lap 2, lap 3, all the way down throughout the rest of the season, and see how well you did in each race compared to your average and all things like that. Again, comparing to your teammates, where sometimes he was better than Latifi, but that's why Latifi isn't at the back, because he was able to outperform Russell some of the time. But for the remainder of the individual categories, Russell was actually one of the more dominant characters in this field.
And Hamilton and Verstappen aside, it's quite close. And
It's
Vettel.
very, very close. Very close.
And Vettel's a bit of an outlier, maybe had a really, really bad season. Verstappen and Hamilton had amazing seasons, but everybody else is just there or thereabouts.
Are there any people that you expect to see in slightly different positions in this one? Anyone that you think is justified where they are?
Once again, Magnussen has dragged a hat up. Okay, you can.
Yeah, I think for me, Russell, I kind of did expect to be where he is. Magnussen, maybe not. Vettel, I thought he'd be towards the back end, but maybe not last. But I think if I went back and looked back at all the races in the season, then maybe, because it feels like it's a while ago now since I last watched an F1 race, because the season ended a couple of months ago. But yeah, I think Vettel's the only one that's slightly surprising again, that he's last, because I did think he'd be towards the back end. But apart from that, I think most of the drivers are sort of where I expected them to be.
Yeah, maybe Bottas. I expected him to be a bit higher. Just noticed him now, as per usual. But yeah, other than that, this one is kind of predictable.
It's good that we all sort of agree on this one. And then the absolute final one, the last graph of this long podcast that we've got going, is the best drivers of 2020. This just averages out just those 4 ranked graphs that we see. So it's just simply 4 averages and who has performed best out of those 4 main categories that we've looked at: qualifying, races, practice to qualifying progression, and race progression. And overall, for the best driver of the season, it puts Max Verstappen P2, then Lewis Hamilton, then George Russell, Ricciardo, Magnussen P4, Leclerc P5, then Gasly, Perez, Sainz, all the way down to Kvyat, Vettel and Albon at the back.
Again, no surprises with the front two. Russell, there was a lot of hype. I didn't think the data would back him up to be third best, but I can see you smiling. I guess the hype train was right. Again, Magnussen pulling a performance out of God knows where in the Haas, but I feel sorry for Albon all the way down the back. Worst driver of the year. I don't think I'd have given him worst driver of the year, but there you go. I can't really argue with the data.
I think this graph's making a strong point, as I think something I made in the past, is after Hamilton, I think Verstappen will be the standout driver on the grid. I don't think for a while after Hamilton there will be many drivers that come near Verstappen, because I think in a few years he has the potential to be challenging Hamilton's records, because pound for pound with the car that he's got, which is definitely not as good as Mercedes, he's topping most of these grids. So, and with his performances he puts out there, I think it just shows how good Verstappen is.
I've just noticed that Latifi and Ocon have got the same rating.
They do indeed. So they were declared equal across the entire season, as there's somebody else with a joint rank as well. The two behind them as well, Kvyat and Vettel.
That's quite surprising for me, because I would have put Ocon as he didn't have a great season, but I wouldn't have said that he was down the back with those guys either, to be honest with you, because I thought he had a slow start, but he got there in the end.
That's true. That's definitely where this differs from your people's just general opinions, which is why I try to keep this as raw data as possible and try not to let any of my opinions and my own biases come into it. And that's why I've ended up choosing well over 2,000 categories for this whole production that you're looking at right now. It's just trying to make it as fair as possible and completely isolated from own subconscious biases towards drivers, either favourites or not favourites or whatever. It's just interesting to highlight where the data actually puts them.
Because especially for F1, we have such a long season, so many sessions and races, that the recency bias really gets you. You remember the last 5 races, say, and from the last 5 races, I don't think we'd go with this order, but you forget the start of the season. And that's a lot about the Red Bull hype as well. We forget how badly they start the season sometimes.
They've never really seemed to start the ground running, especially in this hybrid era. Yes, when they were dominating in the V8s, they were absolutely fine, but since Mercedes have taken over, they've never been able to hit the ground running. They've always come in the second half of the season with a decent, strong package that can challenge them when Mercedes have a bit of a iffy day.
Yeah, again, with what actually I was saying about recency bias, because I sort of definitely more strongly remember the end of the season, Abu Dhabi, Sakir, and so on. And in a lot of the graphs, I was thinking I'd see Perez and Ocon a lot higher, but again, I think that's just because they finished the season fairly strongly. But yeah, and with what you said about Red Bull too, because I agree.
Once again, we see the McLarens a bit further down than I thought they would be. I especially didn't think I'd see Leclerc above both McLarens, but then I guess that's their qualifying record coming to bite them.
Definitely, it was their inconsistency in qualifying, and Leclerc just sort of smashed it in the race, especially against Vettel, because McLaren, they were one of the most even teammate pairings ever. When I was looking at all of this data, all of the race lap times and everything like that, they couldn't be separated. They were always together in terms of all of the data that we've just looked at, which definitely sort of perhaps hindered them a small bit in this, whereas one driver didn't have a massive advantage over the other. So they were relying on other performances to push them up the field compared to Leclerc. but that's where it's laid them, just inside the top 10.
I was going to end on Bottas being so far down and so far away from Hamilton, but I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to say anything more about Bottas. We'll go with Stroll instead. Quite a bit of a gap to Perez.
I think it's justified because he, again, like Vettel, had a solid start. They were basically even, but up until he left, he wasn't in the Eiffel Grand Prix. He then went on a string of just DNFs and couldn't get his mojo back again until the last few races, but he still wasn't the same driver that he was at the start when he took the podium in Italy, when he took decent positions in Hungary as well, competing against the Red Bulls and beating them. It just sort of faded after he caught COVID in Germany and a string of DNFs that followed and no point scores as well. That really, really hampered his season.
And that's just reminded me as well about Verstappen's bad luck. I think he had like 3 DNFs in a row, and he still managed to close out best driver with a decent gap back to Hamilton in these metrics. Just shows again how strong of a season he had.
Absolutely, yeah. Verstappen definitely had a mega season.
Ishan, do you want the last word on this?
Yeah, Mercedes, if you're listening, George Russell's third. Bottas is quite a way down. You know what to do next year. Do it.
Anyhow, they announce 5 seconds after we put this podcast out, we might actually make it. But with that said, Alex, thank you for making these graphs.
No problem.
Clearly
My pleasure.
A lot of time into it and a lot of patience that I don't think either of us do have or will ever have.
That's my hobby. It's what I do.
And if you guys somehow haven't checked out Alex's channel, then make sure you go do that. Alex does F1 stuff. But for now, that's all from us. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, because it's like 80% or something stupid like that of watching the videos and not subscribing. So get on with it. I can't remember the socials, so Ishan, why don't you run to that?
I mean, they're not difficult considering they're all the same, but I think your brain might be a bit fried from all the graphs. But if you want to follow us on Twitter, it's at LTF1Official, and Instagram is LTF1Official. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And yeah, have a good one.
Alex, thanks for coming on. Hopefully we can do
No worries. Thank you very much.
Maybe we'll try and provide the graphs for the next one and see if we can get.
Oh, that would be good. Yeah, I like that idea. I like that.
Cool. I'm going to stop recording. Zoom is going to cut us off in about 30 seconds.